you want me looking at the camera or at you?
Actually, yeah, look at the camera if
Okay.
you can. Yeah. So
I follow your lead. I've found when I've done this stuff to be looking at the camera on the YouTube ones.
yeah.
I found it to be more comfortable to be looking at me.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, you can, because either way.
Either way, I can go back and forth.
Yeah. Yep. I mean,
All right.
it's more conversational if you look at me, probably.
Okay.
So the other night when we were here for your tasting, like I said to you, I mentioned earlier, your Pinots and your Zinfandels stood out, and because I'm mostly interested in Pinot Noir and how it expresses itself in different terroirs or areas or regions, I'd like to know how does Alexander Valley or Russian River Valley come through in that grape?
I think it's a great place to grow it because you get the generous side of things. You get some nice, ripe fruit flavors, but also you still have nice structure to hang all of those flavors on, and the acidity and tannin both in a nice way. So it's quite easy to get something that's really delicious, but also has, the lift that you really look for with Pinot Noir.
If a consumer had 3 or 4 Pinots in front of them to taste, and they were from, say, Central Otago, Willamette, the northern areas of Burgundy, and then Russian River, what would they look for in that style? Is there a style?
I think it's more of a tone to the fruit in general, and there tends to be, vintages are going to vary, particularly in New Zealand. You're going to have vastly different kind of fits and finish, but in Russian River Valley there seems to be more of a consistency of that generosity that you can also choose to have some restraint at that as well. So there typically is more of a black cherry sort of a note, to a greater or lesser degree. That's one of the few things that I would say is pretty much there on a regular basis in Russian River Valley. So it really kind of makes it easy for us, in general, to make some pretty good wine every year.
So how does your winemaking, what goes behind your winemaking each year? If it sounds like there's more consistency in that area, how do you put the Scherrer stamp on that consistency?
I do it hopefully without thinking about it, but basically I'm trying to make wine that tastes good to me based on the material I've got. And I have an image of what I want what I think a ripe grape is that's going to give me the sort of wine that I want to work with. So how do I put my stamp on it? I just kind of make that wine, and it happens without me really thinking about it. It's not like I say, this is what I've got to do to make it a Scherrer wine. I'm just trying to make Pinot Noir from that side, just like I try to make Zinfandel from that side or Cabernet from that side, etc.
So then when you're walking through the different sites before harvest and you're seeing how that vintage is growing, what's going through your mind as far as what you just mentioned?
To decide when to harvest, perhaps? What I'm thinking about is what are the weather guessers telling me the weather's going to be in the next 10 days or so? And how confident am I that they're probably going to guess pretty close to correct? So that's one thing that's going through my mind as I'm out there. Then I look at the state of the vines, what the color of the leaves are. Are they still bright green? Am I getting a little bit of senescence? Or are the vines considering going somewhat senescent, leaves turning yellow and falling off? What shape is the fruit in? Is it really turgid and hard, these little marbles, sort of like you would have from table grapes, very firm grapes, and super crunchy, or are they beginning to soften a little bit? Are the things that make a grape crunchy and hard, are those things kind of dissolving a little bit and it getting a little more pliable? That's the next thing. And then I start eating grapes, and chewing them up a little bit. I take samples while I'm out there and put them in a bucket, because I basically clip a cluster and take a bite out of the side of it like a corn cob to get a whole bunch of the different grapes. Hopefully there's not too many bugs and earwigs hidden in there, but sometimes that happens and I get a mouthful of bugs. So I put the grapes in a bucket and I bring them back to the winery. And then I crush them up with my hand. Again, it tells me something about the feel of the grapes and how hard it is to break them all. Then what I'll do is I'll separate out seeds, a good sample of, a random sample of seeds out of there. Take a look at them, how much stuff is kind of still sticking to the seeds. Do the seeds come loose of all of the tissue, or they're still kind of pulp? and gelatinous things hooked to them. That tells me how close to being super duper ripe this stuff is. Then I'll eat a bunch of those seeds all together without much of the pulp or juice. And it tells me something about the angular side that I'm going to get out of the extraction out of those, the outer parts of the seeds. And I'll do the same thing with the skins. Random, just a kind of a collection of skins with very little pulp or juice, and chew on them, because I'm going to extract out of those two different tissues during the red fermentation while it's on the skins. So this tells me something about how ripe is that material as far as the angles versus rounds, which gives me the balance of the wine. And then I decide, okay, am I going to harvest sooner or later? And once I've decided that, then I'll go ahead and do some analysis on the juice itself, because the grower is going to want to know why I took the sample of grapes if I don't give him some number for that.
Perfect. So as a winemaker whose father grew grapes,
Mm-hmm.
and
He still does grow grapes.
and still does, yeah. For the consumer, what's I think a lot of people think that the same guy does everything. They grow grapes, they make the wine, they do everything. But obviously there are winemakers who grow their own grapes.
Mm-hmm.
There are winemakers who source from growers, and then there are growers who become winemakers. How would you explain those differences to the consumer?
Sure. Well, we have this conception that that you have one person doing it all, and unless you're a home winemaker doing a little tiny bit of stuff, like a few barrels, you can't do it. One person's not doing all the work. You can have one person directing what's going on, or to be the person that's defining what is happening. Often you'll have other people who are charged with carrying out the mission, in these different areas. So people come about this whole thing from different ways, from different aspects. So some people may actually own their vineyards, and they are controlling those. They have all of they have employees that carry out, the mission of what has to happen. And there's a heck of a lot of hand labor involved with this, and a lot of decisions that are made by other people through this. So it's really more of a teamwork situation. Usually one person gets credit for it all, and typically it's the winemaker gets credit for everything, and the people in charge of the growing of the grapes tend to really get less credit, at least in this country. It tends to be more winemaker centric, unfortunately. So anyway, there's growers that grow these really wonderful grapes, and they sell it to wineries, and the wineries become these entities that create something out of somebody else's creation, which is actually just a wonderful act of nature. Anyhow, so you may have a grower who is selling these grapes for years and years. It's a wonderful product, and finally they get the idea, maybe we should actually see this through to finished wine. And so then people come about it that way. And in my situation, that's kind of how it is. At least from a familial standpoint, we've been growing these grapes, selling them to these wineries for years. And at some point, I felt like we should maybe, in a grossest way, say, well, let's preserve the value in this for us, and for me, from just an interest standpoint, what can we do to see what this stuff is really like? And as I make wines from other growers' grapes, it's really neat for them to see what they've actually produced, to keep it separate in barrel, allow them to see what their work and what their hands have done, because I don't know anybody who can taste a grape and tell you exactly what the wine is going to be like. So it has to be transformed in order to really understand it. So what I try to do is to make a small amount of wine for my growers, but the growers I work with, to allow them to have multiple experiences with their own work, and they can think about the choices they've made that have gone into the bottle of wine that I've been able to make. And hopefully, that becomes a long-term partnership of trying to really get the best expression of what nature is offering here.
Great. Let's cut so we don't have to use